August 1945. The Soviet Union is occupied up to the AA line. Spain, Portugal, and Turkey have joined the Axis. 2 German cities have been nuked, and an intense war is waged over the English Channel and Middle East. With no peace treaty or neutrality acts holding them down, the Americans and British prepare to unleash all their meticulously crafted toys. Just 4 months after the death of Roosevelt, Truman kicked off his presidency by pressing the big red button. But the follow-up had been planned since 1941. The war industry had kicked off after Pearl Harbor, but apart from covert operations, the Allies could do little more but stand by as Germany engulfed the Soviet Union. This came at a great cost, but it also created a vast disparity in experience. Mustache Man, what's the point of this, YouTube? Why do you keep demonetizing these videos despite me avoiding saying his name? I even made sure to have that particular Hindu symbol covered up, and it didn't matter. Nukes in Korea? Fine. Calling out Stalin and blowing up Chernobyl? A-okay. But talking about the most famous war in history? Now that's too far. Rant aside, I'm gonna make bonus content exclusively for my Patreon and YouTube members. So hey, check that out. Anyway, Mustache Man, God I hate saying that, had been in power since 1933. And with the win over the Soviets in 1944, he spent a year prepping for this encounter. In our timeline, World War II can be seen as one big conflict, with a prologue in Ethiopia, China, and Spain. But in this alternate timeline, the big war is split into 3 distinct phases. Germany taking over Poland, Denmark, Norway, and France, ending with the peace treaty with Britain in 1940, Germany attacking the Soviets while Japan bombs Pearl Harbor a year later, and lastly, May 1945. A well-organized German Wehrmacht, Luftwaffe, and Kriegsmarine attempt to crush the British Empire. With Britain phased out of the war until that point, it makes no sense to declare war on America until 1945, and when Mustache Man does, it blows up in his face. Or should I say, it blows up in Cologne and Hamburg. Ouch. In our world, Goebbels used the bombing of Dresden to launch a propaganda campaign aimed at revoking the Geneva Conventions and spurring on new recruits. Rather than seeing that happen in the closing chapters of the war, here we see that at its very onset. Germany's own Pearl Harbor. Something so horrific, it's seared into the public consciousness. And now, it was time for Germany to unveil its own super weapon. The Jerrys may have dreamed of building a great navy, but you don't need to dream about sailing a great ship. All thanks to the sponsor of today's video, World of Warships Legends. World of Warship Legends is a massive multiplayer free-to-play console game for those who love naval battle. Not only can you experience World of Warships in a whole new way on console, but now there is an exciting PvE mode where you face a series of story-driven scenarios. Introducing War Tales, a new update with 3 new tales to put your skills to the test. Frost Sword, where you must protect allied convoys at an Arctic choke point. Bleeding Heart, fight off constant attacks while protecting a wounded ship critical to the war effort. Chainbreaker, control the points while fighting off an ever stronger wave of enemies. You don't have to fight alone, fight with friends in a squad. Team up in divisions with 3 to 5 players. Choose from any ship type starting from tier 3 to beat the challenge. You can use combat orders to power up yourself and others in the middle of battle. If you haven't tried World of Warships Legends, that's okay. New players will get a welcome pack by using the link in the description. In this pack, they'll get the American Tier 3 Premium Battleship Arkansas, German Tier 3 Cruiser Karlsruhe, 7 days of premium account, 5 common crates, 10 red, white, and blue camouflages, and 10 hunter camouflages too. So why not join 8 million other players, and fight under the flag of 11 different nations? There are 400 plus ships to choose from and unlock, and 20 plus maps to fight on. There's never been a better time to dive in. Play World of Warships Legends today. Until this point, I intentionally left out Iceland from the picture for the sake of pacing, but if you're one of my 21,000 viewers from Iceland, first off, hi. Second, strap in, because this is your first and only mention. Just like the dual invasion of Iran by the British and the Soviets in 1941, the rushed invasion of Iceland in 1940 tends to be swept under the rug. Essentially, in order to prevent it from falling into German hands, the British sent in some Marines and occupied Iceland for the duration of the war. Germany considered going there themselves, but calculated that the cost of maintaining the island would outweigh the benefits. In this alternate timeline, this would unfold the exact same way, only 5 years later. So far, so good. Iceland is denied. Now for the other big base of operations, one that could cut Britain out of its empire. A small chain of Portuguese islands, strategically located just 1,500 miles away from Boston, beating out how close Hawaii was to California by 900 miles. A fun fact which both Roosevelt and Dan B067 were both well aware of. The famous War Plan Grey from our timeline never had to be put into place, since Portugal never ended up leasing its bases to the Germans. But having joined the Axis in 1943, this scenario gives the Germans 2 full years to pack these islands full of U-boat wolf packs and heavy fortifications. July 1945. Days before the Trinity test, and 2 months since the Azores were used to sink countless convoys full of men and equipment coming in from the Commonwealth. Truman and Churchill prepare an armada to take out the Wolf Den. The cracked Enigma codes outlined the numbers and positions of the enemy vessels, but nothing could prepare the Allies for what came next. HMS Hood, HMS Queen Elizabeth, HMS Warspite, HMS Indomitable, all escorted by cruisers and destroyers, sailed side by side with the American Navy. Truman sent in the battleships USS Texas and her sister USS New York, as well as USS Arkansas, Colorado, and the new USS Iowa. Alongside them were the aircraft carriers USS Ranger and USS Yorktown, a formidable armada. After all, with the Mediterranean in Axis hands, this was the only corridor from which Anzac forces could arrive. But this Germany, 1945 Germany, with all of the oil and metal it could wish for, without a disrupted economy and a vast amount of naval ports, manages to produce cutting-edge equipment and vehicles. Enter the Type 21 Electro U-boat, the first true modern submarine. The template used by the Americans, British, and Soviets for all future subs. Germany had many of these crazy projects, which either failed to materialize due to, lack of materials, or managed to produce only a handful of them. The Electroboat was in the latter category since it came to life in 1944, but here, in this alternate timeline, the Azores have dozens of them. Its design minimized the acoustic signature, making it harder for sonar to pick up on its location when submerged. The Allied Armada would succeed in bombing the hell out of the many island bases, but at the cost of losing nearly every ship, as well as thousands of sailors. Fighter pilots would see their aircraft carriers sink to the bottom of the Atlantic with nowhere to land. This painful crash course is one the Allies would never forget. From that point on, naval traffic is rerouted to go from the Indian Ocean to the Caribbean, before eventually hoping to make it past the wolf packs and into Britain. This scenario isn't just speculation for the sake of speculation. It's really just expanding on plans that were in place from both sides. Things like Operation Barbarossa, the Middle Eastern Campaign, the Manhattan Project, experimental designs, and War Plan Grey. This next chapter isn't any different. On January 27th, 1939, Mustache Man orders Plan Z into action. The rearmament and expansion of the Kriegsmarine by 1948. This project is given the highest industrial priority. Interestingly enough, we know what would have been ordered: 4 aircraft carriers, 68 destroyers, and 10 battleships. In our timeline, this was scrapped in less than a year due to oil, but thanks to Romania and the Caucasus in this scenario, that's no longer an issue. With the help of Baltic bases, an infinite Swedish metal cheat, and German engineering, the Royal Navy now has a run for its money. A few of you pointed out that 5 more years was just not enough time for Germany to build a legit navy, and I get that, but consider this. In 1933, post-Versailles Germany had an army of 100,000 troops, and no air force to speak of. Then look what happened. An alternate buildup of its navy wouldn't be impossible, it just wasn't the main priority in our timeline. With the first conflict settled, Germany now has time to fully focus on countering the British. So in 1945, the two meet in the North Sea. Rather than having one side rush things while the other just plays a strategic long game, there's now a state of panic and urgency all around. Truman and Churchill have a lot to prove, and Mustache Man kinda waits too long to play with his new toy. Speaking of which, it should be mentioned that by 1945, the Führer's health was not the best. He did have mood swings that were amplified by his prescribed use of certain drugs, but that doesn't mean he would have driven the nation off a cliff with reckless decisions. This idea that Mustache Man was the one who made all the bad tactical calls really just came from him overruling decisions in the later stage of the Eastern Front, and also the Desert Fox having really good PR. A naval conflict against the British in the North Sea isn't a bad idea, it's a necessity for Germany's war effort. Now whether they would win is another question. This alternate North Sea clash is the largest naval battle in history. By the end, the Atlantic is littered with a lot of scrap. To soften Britain up, the Kriegsmarine launches armadas from its Norwegian bases, attempting to fish out the Allies. Even with its alternate massive buff and fulfilling its naval buildup, the Kriegsmarine is still outnumbered 5-1. Additionally, unlike the Allied intelligence systems where different agencies fed their data to a centralized one, the German intelligence apparatus was divided into 3 parts: Army, Navy, and Air Force. In our timeline, all received hints that the Enigma was broken, but apart from knowing that it would cost their heads, they were never able to share notes, as the intel was segregated. Karl Donitz in our timeline pretty much knew that the code was broken, but he had no way to prove his suspicions. On top of that, the American aircraft technology was just out of this world. We're talking P-51 Mustangs, Lockheed P-80s, prototype F-86 Sabres, Bearcats, and Corsairs, all produced in massive quantities. This isn't just a one-sided battle, however. What they lacked in technology, the Luftwaffe made up for in experience. By this time in this alternate war, they had flown over Poland, France, Greece, and the Soviet Union. Hundreds of operations, creating thousands of experienced fighters. Despite their tech advantage, for those first crucial months, the Allies would be playing catch-up. Now, it's not like the Axis had no advantage. There was one revolutionary weapon that barely got any playtime in our World War II. I'm talking about the Fritz X, also known as the world's first guided bomb. This was specifically designed to deal with ships. In our timeline, a 3,000-pounder was first used in 1943, and it nearly derailed the Allied invasion of Italy. Both the British and Americans had radio-guided bombs and missiles in 1944, but the Fritz was on a whole other level. What this means is that the Brits not only had to defend against a storm of aircraft coming from France, but Spitfires and Mustangs also have to patrol the North Sea too. Now, the Allies were more than capable of sustaining the inevitable losses thanks to the American industry, but due to the Azores and Canary Islands, Truman has to take bold risks. In our timeline, the peak of U-boat activity caused a 6% interception of all convoys. Here, perhaps we see that rate go up to 10 or even 15%, just due to increased quantity and quality of submarines. So many ships and supplies, not to mention countless lives, are lost in a desperate Hail Mary to save the last resistance in Europe. Germany might even have the advantage. But then comes August 1945, when the sun rose over Germany, signifying the dawn of the atomic age. It's morning in Hamburg and Cologne, the second and fourth largest German cities. The war is all the talk on radio and newspapers, but on the ground, it's all just that, news. This is all about to change. In a sudden flash, the city center ignites. Thousands look away from the blinding light. Most are engulfed in fire. In a matter of seconds, buildings are blasted from their foundation. A fireball soars into the air before morphing into a distinct mushroom. It's a scene that's repeated twice in Germany. Now, this is something to certainly speculate. Two cities being wiped off the map in the middle of a war, and not at the end. Now, the actual consequences of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are still being debated to this day. But one major reason for that is because the bombings were at the end of the war. Was it the Soviets invading Manchuria, or was it the nukes? Doesn't matter. War's over anyway. Yet in this alternate timeline, these important German cities are nuked while Germany is still at full strength. Honestly, even stronger than in our timeline. And yet, that strength could do nothing against an actual nuclear attack. That has to be impactful. More impactful than it was with Japan. For one, by the time Hiroshima and Nagasaki were bombed, Japan had already been subjected to fire bombings. The nukes were sudden and horrific in other ways, but the Japanese populace had faced months of bombings by that point. In this alternate timeline, these bombings would be truly out of the blue. It'd be something that would shock the German populace, which in this scenario had not seen any repercussions of the war abroad. And then, without warning, that happens. Frankly, while this does destroy two enemy cities, this would be a propaganda goldmine for Germany. Even in our timeline, the bombings of Dresden were decried by the Nazi government as a crime, going too far. Avenging Dresden was pushed by Goebbels for the last few months of the war, and that was by 1945, so it didn't matter that much. In this alternate scenario, we're talking about two cities getting wiped off the map as the war's just getting started, with a death toll that would be in the hundreds of thousands, undisputed, and all for what was essentially going to be seen by the Germans as a sneak attack. A cowardly move by an inferior enemy who resorted to science instead of strength. Like, I can already imagine how this would play. If nukes had been dropped on any country that wasn't already bombed back to the Stone Age, or trapped on an island, or already lost, there would be an immense outrage by the people. Something that might have real ramifications. Despite causing some disruption to the Reich's industry for a bit, this bombing is really the German Pearl Harbor, despite them being the ones who technically started the war. But that was the past war. That doesn't really count. This is a new one. And the Americans went too far. What I'm getting at here is that things get really ugly. Like, more ugly than they did in our timeline. I could very easily imagine reprisals against many assorted groups throughout Europe. If I say anything else, this video is going to get demonetized. For many people in occupied territories and prisoners of war captured in the Middle East, the nuke is essentially spraying a wolf with pepper spray while you're still in the cage with the wolf. Sure, it can't get out of the cage, but it can vent its frustration on you. Also, the wolf now wants to obliterate London. The Allies have, or should I say had, two nukes, but the Germans have the V3 supergun, also known as the weapon you'd see in Red Alert. In our time, it nearly became operational. I say nearly because the Allies bombed the living hell out of the facility while it was being built. 17 times in less than a year, usually with over 100 bombers at a time. They really wanted this thing dead. So what was this super weapon? A huge underground system was built, where several of these long-range artillery guns were permanently fixed on London. Near Calais, this gun could fire 5,000-pound explosive shells traveling at around 5,000 feet per second, and capable of hitting London with deadly accuracy. It used a method called supercharging, where multiple chambers fed into the massive barrel. As for the V, similarly to the rockets, it stood for vengeance, with its sole purpose being to terrorize the British population. Speaking of rockets, Wernher von Braun wasn't idle. Oh no, he was experimenting and perfecting his rockets against the Soviets. Thanks to this alternate increased resource pool, his ballistic missiles now can be bigger, faster, pointier, and above all else, more accurate. These weapons were gonna be used anyway, but after the nukes, all bets are off. London had incredible air defenses, as well as the RAF, but it would be powerless against the V3 supergun. Even if most of its rounds missed, this weapon was far cheaper to use compared to a bombing run against a city, or the resources needed for V2 rockets. We're talking day in and day out, shells coming at Mach 4 speeds. Without question, this leads to mass evacuations of the civilian population, as well as the political heads of state. This means that Churchill and Parliament might need to head out towards Cornwall, or even Yorkshire, to prevent the potential political crises that would come if a random shell would hit. The only way to prevent all of that is to ensure that the third nuke in production was meant for the fortress of Mimoyek, where the guns were stored. A hit delivered by a B-29 could end the threat, might destroy the guns, and prevent a mass panic which the fleeing of the Prime Minister would surely cause. When this happens, radiation levels spike close to Paris, and Uncle Sam is officially out of nukes for the entire year. 32 years after Einstein's theory of relativity, and just 7 years after Chadwick discovered the neutron, it was German scientists who discovered nuclear fission. Many already speculated uranium ore to be a highly valuable resource, with Belgium even storing 1,250 tons of it on Staten Island. The mine from which the ore came from was deep within the Belgian Congo, where another 3,000 tons of it, then worthless ore, sat in storage facilities. In our timeline, after Belgium was occupied, its colonies continued to aid the Allies, selling uranium at a ludicrously high cost. But in this alternate scenario, Germany gets a free hand in taking over the colony, following a peace deal with Britain in 1940. No doubt most of those 3,000 tons still make their way to New York, as it would have taken a couple of years for Germany to actually establish control. But considering they purchased 60 tons of the ore in 1940, it's safe to assume they would stockpile it. That means that from 1941 onwards, the Manhattan Project could not rely on the Congo for its uranium enrichment program. The first 4 nukes, including the one used in Trinity, still get made thanks to the Belgian stockpiles, and the Congo mine would be acquired within a month after the war began. But it took months, several months, for the enrichment process. Canada, Colorado, and Utah did possess minor uranium deposits, but nothing in the world came close to that Congo quality. Even with an infinite amount of financing from the US government, America would be able to arm no more than 1 nuke every 2 months, starting in 1946. But until then, a lot happens in another crucial theater. Okay, so once again, on paper, what should be a relatively easy front for the Allies turns ugly in a hurry. Sure, the British have the Universal Centurion tanks alongside the A-34 Comet, both developed in late 1944, while Uncle Sam boasted upgraded EZ-8 versions of the M4 Sherman, as well as the M26 Pershing. Thanks to that earlier Iran-Iraq proxy war, the Allies loaded Iraq with a ton of hardware. Then there's Saudi Arabia, which just stumbled upon its first oil well in 1938. By 1944, regardless of the timeline, America builds a formidable airbase at Dhahran, a base close to said oil well. This gives rise to the Arabian-American oil company, Aramco. Today, it controls 259 billion barrels worth of oil and gas reserves, unmatched by any other company globally. So, with no U-boats in proximity, tons of air bases, high-tech tanks, fighters and bombers, as well as a British-controlled India right next door, what could possibly go wrong? Everything. Everything goes wrong. The equipment and organization of the Roman legion wasn't the reason the empire conquered most of Europe. As Caesar proved against other Roman legions, experience was a crucial component. The only theater where the Wehrmacht could flex its muscle was its campaign against Syria, Egypt, Iraq, and Iran. Led by the Desert Fox himself, Rommel had a higher quality and quantity of troops and tanks, hardened by General Winter and fueled by the Caucasus, allowing him to rampage through the Fertile Crescent. In our timeline, the US suffered multiple failures as it tried to get its inexperienced soldiers and officer corps to adapt from its outdated strategies in North Africa. Early commanders like General Lloyd Fredendall were criticized for being indecisive and disconnected from frontline realities. This led to their replacement by more capable leaders like General George S. Patton. But all that took time which they had due to facing off against Italians and the Germans being distracted by the Soviets. Here, not only are those issues compounded, but you've got a President Truman eager for results. Additionally, you have a Winston Churchill who, well, I'll just let Teddy say it.
And let's face it, you're not all that great! You tossed away lives in Gallipoli like they were scraps off your plate!
Especially if those were Indian lives. Iraq would turn into a bloodbath. Despite the locals initially assisting the Axis against British rule, they would probably soon learn what the Ukrainians did earlier and regret their choice. By the end of 1946, Allied control might be limited to the Gulf area, with Mosul, Baghdad, Tabriz, and Tehran liberated by the Axis, where they acquire even more oil wells. Keep in mind that while the Axis suffered huge casualties, the German, Spanish, Italian, Romanian, and Turkish forces don't fare much better. Lines are drawn around Isfahan and Basra as both sides prepare for a grueling war of attrition. Over the Mediterranean, things are just as bleak. The Axis blitzkrieg rolls through Syria, Jordan, and Palestine, despite fierce resistance from the Allies. Bombers flatten Cairo, with a very high chance that a random bomb hits the pyramids, while Jerusalem is turned to dust. By the end of 1946, the nuclear arsenal is dry. A battered Britain barely stands. The Atlantic is crawling with U-boats, and all seems lost. But this is where we kiss the dreams of a decisive Axis win goodbye. Because even in this timeline, there's still hope at the end of the tunnel for the Allies. But that's for another time. This is Cody of Alternate History Hub.